What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 87 of the Noizze Podcast, brought to you by Noizze.co.uk and sponsored by Stereo Brand Records. I am your host / your boy, Chris Pugh, and as ever, I'm joined by my very good friend and Mr. Cynical himself, Samuel Lewis. Mate, the time is approaching. We are needing to curate that album of the year list. How are you, and how are you getting on with that task?
I'm well. It's great to see you once again, my friend. And I'm feeling pretty good. About it. I've got about 12 now.
Right, okay.
That are pretty solidly there, and it's just sort of figuring out maybe the second half honorable mentions and things like that, and then wrestling with my subconscious for the next 6 to 9 days before we have to finalize any kind of list where I'm making last minute decisions. I was still shuffling albums around on the morning of the podcast last year.
Yeah,
I made like a last minute, or at least the day before, I made like a last minute decision to move a couple of albums up, and I made a decision about a few other bits and bobs. I think it was Svalbard that got like a late push because I re-listened to it and I was like, actually really good. And Misery Signals by is it Misery Signals?
Misery Signals did a record that year.
Yeah, Misery Signals lost out and stuff. So yeah, I'm not looking forward to that process where I'm just like internally conflicted for a few days. But I think for the most part, the money making section of the list is fairly done.
How, are you top 5 solid? They're in, and you've got no temptation to move, or are you top 3 at least solid with no temptation to move?
I would say my top 3 are fairly solid, although I reserve the right for that solidity to abate at any point from to suit myself. But yeah, I would say top 3 at this moment. I'm fairly happy with. 4 to 12 though, and 12 onwards is a mishmash, mate.
I haven't started my list yet. That I'm going to start. I've got a fairly good idea of the bands that will kind of beef it out. But in terms of my top 3, I'm not really certain at this point in time. I think the only one that I'm certain on is what I would put in at number 1. And after we do this show, actually, so I'm going to because every time we listen to a record that we love, I buy it on vinyl, but I also chuck it into an album of the year list I've got on Spotify, purely for this moment, because after this podcast, our next full podcast will be our album of the year show. So that's when I'll go back. Then I'm going to listen to the albums that I've got in this place and really start being quite specific and numbering them and being really trying to weigh everything up and fighting internally over what should go where. And it's fun, but it can also be like quite daunting and sometimes arduous, because I remember when we filmed, not just like this film, but literally we're in a studio filming our album of the year show for 2018 or 19. I
think it was 19. Dude.
It was some year. They've all blended into one these days. I think it would have been 2019 actually. Like I remember in the morning on the way to the studio with you and Jack, I was in the back and I was making a switch in the back of the car, because you just do down here. You hear like a song off an album that came out this year. That song's amazing, and I forgot about this, forgot about that. So it is quite an arduous task. But I think that this year, we've said it a million times, so we're not going to go into it again, but we have been treated this year. And I think this year's album of the year show will be the best that we've ever done in terms of quality of albums in discussion. And we've never done a bad one, because they've always been great albums to discuss. But this year specifically, in terms of your average listing in our album of the year episode, this is going to be the best one we've done this year.
I think you're right. This has been the best year we've been doing this, dating back to Soundcheck in 2016.
Yeah, I'd agree. We should tell you who we are if this is the first time you ever listened to us. We are the Noizze Podcast, brought to you by Noizze.co.uk and sponsored by Stereo Brand Records. We are Fortnightly Rock and Metal Show. You can catch us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, basically wherever you get your podcast. Me and Sam will be there. The best way to support us is by subscribing if you're watching on YouTube, or liking or following, depending on whichever service you are using. Follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast. Both me and Sam run that account. On this week's show, we're going to be reviewing a new of Mice and Men album, Echo, as well as Volbeat's new record, Servant of the Mind. Absolutely nothing going on pretty much in news, Sam, or at least nothing that I'd like to discuss with you. So let's not hang around. We'll get straight into the show, man. We are going to start things off with Of Mice and Men's new record, Echo. It's out on December 3rd via Sharp Tone Records. Echo is kind of the culmination of 3 Of Mice and Men EPs that have been released this year. First, we had Timeless, then we had Bloom, and now this. Echo sees all 3 EPs put together in one full record. Me and Sam have already previously reviewed Timeless and Bloom separately as EPs, so we'll be reviewing Echo almost primarily as an EP, but I think there will be moments where we refer to it as a whole piece of music because we'll get into it. Sam, does it feel hyperbolic to say that Of Mice and Men's career has been rescued over the past 3 years? I don't think so personally. I'm just curious what you think about that statement.
No, I don't think it's hyperbolic at all. I think it's a comment on, it's been a rough couple of years. It's been a rough couple of years for them, with the myriad of personnel issues that we don't need to detail. We don't need to retell the story, anything like that. There's been, lineup amendments, and the band has had to move forward and readdress and sort of hit reset, which is appropriate because when you hit reset, you tend to have to start at the beginning, and that appears to be what Of Mice and Men have tried to do on this latest record, which is a collection of EPs, as you say. Essentially, it's like a mini series, almost episodic. These EPs have been, and the culmination of which I think was incredibly vital for them, and has, I think, paid massive dividends.
Well, I think anyone curious about Of Mice and Men's band history, you can just Google and find out exactly what went on. So we won't talk about that specifically. What we can talk about, though, is the fact that this is a really weird thing to say, but even though the records have steadily decreased in terms of position on album charts, I feel like the band's got healthier and healthier over the past 3 years, and that sounds like I've just kind of juxtaposed my own opinion there, but. If you go back to Restoring Force, that hit 4th, absurd, on the US Billboard 200, and it absolutely capitalized on the wave that modern metalcore was riding at that time. But then once Cold World hit 2 years after, it really felt like the band's momentum had been slowed, mostly because that album is pretty rubbish, I've got to say. It's not a good record at all. And then obviously you've got the personnel issues, which you have mentioned and alluded to, just which you can Google if you want to find out about if you're not quite sure what happened. But I want to point out that this is genuinely the most excited I've felt about this band since 2013, Sam.
Yeah, I think the narrative changed when we saw them.
Yeah.
Recently after the change, we felt, oh, all right, we'll see what it's like, but there's no indication that this could be really, really good. They were terrific. Yeah. And walked away thinking, all right, the future could be brighter than we expected. And I think that has powered a lot of the last sort of 8 to 12 months of Mice and Men, at least from our view as listeners.
So we saw Of Mice and Men on the back of the Defy tour, which came out in 2018, and you mentioned it there. We kind of we got tickets to that show because we was like, you know what, metalcore in Birmingham, let's do it. It's 25-minute train journey away. We'll have a good night regardless. Wage War was supporting as well. But that was when Wage War were really at the peak. That was another reason why we fancied it. And man, we left that gig like that was really, really awesome. And Of Mice and Men, still a great band, and fairs to Aaron Pauly for fronting this record and absolutely delivering on it. They did another record a year later, Earth and Sky, another very, very solid record. But then it gets to the point of this year where they've released these 3 EPs and now Echo as a full record. And really, Sam, and possibly this is the best kind of compliment we can give this album and this band at this current point. No reason for you to be an Of Mice and Men fan that's pining over Of Mice and Men in the early 2010s. I feel like this album Whether you think it's better than that period of Mice and Men or not is another question, but it doesn't give you much reason to miss 2011 of Mice and Men, does it? Doesn't
No, I don't
force
think
you
so.
to miss it.
No, I don't think so. I think it's as good as a lot of the material they wrote during that period of time. And in fact, in some ways, there's a maturity to it as well, and there's a professionalism and a sheen that's sort of been attached to some of these songs that I actually think there's a plus points over some of that sort of early peak material. Because when you remove nostalgia, this is as good in my view as a lot of the stuff that they produced in that sort of peak era.
I agree with that. I agree with that completely. And again, strangely, album chart position doesn't suggest so, but I feel like there's the most momentum behind them now than there has been since 2016, 2017 at least. And again, it feels like I'm contradicting myself with the point that I'm making about actually in terms of sales, that might not actually be the case. But it just feels different. It sounds like a really kind of strange thing to say when I'm supposed to be someone that's kind of critically looking at something. It feels different now, doesn't it? This brand, this era of Mice and Men. I mean, kind of a reveal now. We're going to be talking to Aaron Pauley next week, bassist and vocalist for Mice and Men. That's going to be an extra special episode. And I'm going to mention it. I'm going to mention the fact that it just feels different as we speak. And for a band that are entering into their second decade, that's not usual. Usually by year 11, we already know how it feels. We know how the band feels. We know how they move. We know what to expect from them. We know what's going to work. We know what's not. But at this point for Mice and Men, there is just a different air around the band, one that I haven't felt around them since early 2010s.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the circumstances have obviously contributed to a lot of that. But I agree that there feels like a somewhat of a retribution around of Mice and Men, and this does feel like a new era. And it does feel like they've either refound or stumbled across a new identity amongst themselves, or maybe what they feel that they're capable of, what they feel that they're good at, what they feel that best serves their fandom and also them as musicians. I think I really like early of Mice and Men. Really like early of Mice and Men. And I didn't like mid-tier, like Carlisle early replacement Carlisle situation. In the last couple of albums, I was ambivalent towards that period. Obviously, we agree that Cold World I thought was really a failed experiment. I think the band essentially admitted as much with their artistic decisions following that. But this feels like not just a heralding back, but actually a step forward from that too. Like, it does not feel that they're trying to recapture. I agree. It's very hard to tangibly explain this, that it doesn't actually feel that they're trying to recapture their first 2 to 3 albums. It feels like as if 2014 to 2020 had never happened, and this was the natural follow-up. That's what it feels like to me. There's almost like been like an erasure of that sort of history a little bit, but it's actually worked because it isn't like a band that's been around 30 to 40 years being like, this is gonna sound like we did say in 1983, or a band that's been around 20 years saying this next album's the heaviest album we've ever done. Not mentioned anybody so specific with that one. But the idea here is that actually feels like a nice, sorry, Corey. It's been a nice transition from their early material in the mid 2010s. Like, if this came out in 2015, it fits. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But also, I want to shout out again. It seems smoother. There's like a professionalism here. Every song has this kind of like business-like approach. Like, it's like between 4 and 5 minutes long. Everything's very structured. There's like a clear blueprint. It works really, really well. They seem to have found what both works for them and what works for Aaron as a vocalist, who, before we actually get into any track by track sort of analysis or even the new track analysis, is coming to his own.
Yeah, man.
Really, really coming to his own. You can feel the comfort on some of these choruses, which he was always great at, but some of the stuff as like a really brutal, heavy vocalist, like the section at the end of Pulling Teeth He's not something I would have ever really heard him do in the last couple of albums. Some massive choruses on Obsolete and Timeless to open this. Even the stuff where they're like on Anchor, where it's like a bass line only during the verses and he's kind of just singing over the top of it. Stuff that I wouldn't really expect. And like to finish on Hopelessly Hoping, which feels like it felt like Linkin Park.
Yeah,
times.
man.
That kind of song. So just as like a myriad of stuff that actually you can tell that they're comfortable being experimental in terms of their artistic decisions, as well as sort of retaining some of the classic metalcore tropes. This is, I remember thinking, I should be ashamed of myself for even thinking this, because I almost like I had to remind myself afterwards. I listened to a couple of it. I said, "Oh, that sounds like Early Wage War," and then I was like, "You idiot! Early Wage War sounds like with Mice and Men, because Mice and Men came first."
Yeah,
and it's like you've forgotten that they were actually like the godfathers to a lot of the stuff that we compare to each other now. This is really, really good. This might sneak into a certain list of mine. Near the bottom of the top 10 for me. Because when you actually hear it as an overall piece,
it is great. Yeah,
it is terrific. And we said it at the time, and it would be churlish not to now. Said to you at the time, stick these EPs together. This would be a top 10 album of the year for us. And I've stuck these EPs together, and I've really got to stand by it. It's a top 10 album of the year. This is really tremendous. I think I really enjoyed this. It's an enjoyable, pleasant listen. And for a metalcore album, does that say it's welcome or actually become too tedious or over reliant on the same sort of metal tropes and things like that? It stays varied and versatile, but within the overall umbrella of a good metalcore album. And I repeat, Aaron here, he's just really, really tremendous as a vocalist, and I think he's taken some real strides and really established himself as a true leader of this band, because he's the star of the show here.
He's the star. I mean, he's also the producer as well, which I think is something that should be mentioned. And yeah, a record that was produced over Zoom because of obviously COVID-19. Logistically, for Mice and Men to pull off a decent average album here would have been somewhat impressive, but for them to pull off what they have done here, which I think is their third best album, I'd go for Self-Titled second and The Flood at number one. But for me, this is comfortably their third best album as a whole piece. And Aaron Pauley, who, it's strange now to think this, but Aaron's actually been in the band longer than Austin, which is, it's strange to think. But Aaron came in 2012 and he's been there for like 9 years now. I think Austin left after about 7. But Aaron is the star of the show. It's becoming to the point where Aaron takes that frontman mantle and really runs with it and does tremendous things with it. I mean, if we think about the title track, Echo, that is the kind of song that 2015 of Mice and Men quite simply could not have written, because while they had Austin in the band at the time, they were constantly trying to cater for what he was able to do, and that held them back. That was one of the reasons why Cold World wasn't a good album, because they were constantly trying to cater to what Austin could do, and they really, obviously, Austin left the band and wouldn't be allowed back in the band now for reasons that you can Google. But I mentioned this at the start, he's not missed. I don't miss him at all. Obviously, I wouldn't be comfortable with him being in the band now anyway, after allegations that were kind of raised against him. But he's not missed. The title track is a song that simply could not have written 6 years ago, and the Echo and Helplessly Hoping are the only 2 songs on this album that aren't already out, because Mosaic and Fighting Gravity have already been released as singles, and obviously the rest of the album were from 2 separate EPs this year. But even though people would have already heard it, mate, Fighting Gravity, that is what makes me excited about the future. Songs like that make me really excited about what is going to come from Mice and Men.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've just looking through some of the tracks here, regardless of whether whether we reviewed them and spoken about them before. Mosaic could be a modern Slipknot song, like legit, in terms of the brutality and stuff, like and the tempo and some of the drum work here as well. And then
also could have been on any of Mice and Men album prior to 2014 as well.
Completely agreed. There's they seem to have tapped into a kind of brutality as well that I never thought they'd be capable of with Aaron Pauley at the helm. I really thought that'd soften because of his involvement, and that would sort of turn into kind of like a hard rock band with elements of metalcore, but they've absolutely swung the other way, that they're a metalcore band with some elements of hard rock at times, and it's really worked well. There are just some choruses as well that they couldn't do with Austin Carlile. You're absolutely right. Like Obsolete is not a chorus Austin Carlile could have contributed to. Really at all. And the fact that they've got songs like Levy and the title track Bloom and Pulling Teeth as well. Big shout to bands that can make sort of transitions towards a more theatrical sound or like a grand sound in terms of how big it feels, but also maintaining some of that metal tropes that make it as hard and as tough as it continually is. It's a great comeback story. That's a nice narrative to be able to talk about, and they deserve that, because the last 3 to 4 years must have been anything but easy.
I want to focus quickly on the concept of me and you. We've mentioned it a few times. We've drip feed it into our conversation. What's next? So like, what could possibly come next? I mean, that Dave, as a fan, I've enjoyed the 3 EP releases. They've been brave enough and bold enough to kind of roll that out there and see what it looks like. We're going to speak to Aaron next week, and we're going to find out how they kind of evaluate the success, or whether there was something that's happened that's made them potentially think about doing something in another way in the next record release. But I like how they've gone about this record. It's the kind of thing where if they were to just release this album as a whole piece in February, there's a decent chance we and several others would have just forgotten about it by now. But by releasing it in 3 separate chunks, they've kept themselves in the zeitgeist and kept themselves in memory, because the first EP, Timeless, great. In fact, I think Timeless is the best of the 3 EPs. Timeless, brilliant. And then I think they released in like February. They let the dust settle on that. They released Levy, I believe, they released Bloom, in August. The dust has settled, and now Echo, right at the end of the year, bringing everything together and rounding it off. I feel like it was a really astute move, and I feel like that this is something that metalcore bands could absolutely utilize, or any band could utilize moving forward, because I think it's worked really well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Actually, it's kind of extended their place in the zeitgeist for 12 months out of the same amount of creative output, which is really sort of good. It only works really if your album's good, though.
Yeah.
I know that everyone thinks that it is, but like, I mean, there are certain albums that just would not have survived a 3-month dripping release, because by track 7, by the second release, I'll be like, actually, mate, you can keep the final third of this. It's all right.
Yeah.
But that works when you've got a terrific album, because it worked wonders for Turnstile as well, sort of releasing singles over the course leading up to a final release, really, where you felt like you were just filling in gaps. So I thought that was really, really cool. So yeah, I massive respect for Mice and Men, and I think this album is a grand success.
Mice and Men are absolutely back to the best, and that I tweeted this out earlier. That's a cool thing, that is, because at one time you had to question where it was going to go for them. If we look back 6 years ago, it's not looking great. And another thing that I love that I have to mention is that they're on Sharp Tone Records, and you've got young bands like Loathe and Holding Absence on Sharp Tone with all the potential, and then you've got the proven heavyweights in of Mice and Men headlining and having been that veteran band, if you can call them that. And I think that works really well. I can't think of a better place for of Mice and Men to be than on Sharp Tone Records, acting as the veteran band. And literally the next 2 years of a Mice and Men's career could be really, really cool to sit back and watch as a fan, because the signs indicate that there's still something great to come.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair, and I like their place. I like their place in the metal world, as you've stated as well. Well deserved at this rate.
For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you will notice that me and Sam have, or at least me, has somewhat changed clothes. And that is because when we tried to do this episode on our normal day of recording, the internet speed between us just kept crashing, and it was literally impossible to do the review. So we had to cut the recording and wait for a couple of days until we were both next free on the same evening to do the end of the podcast. So with that, we are now going to move on to Volbeat, Servant of the Mind. It's out on December 3rd via EMI Records. It's the band's 8th studio album and the follow-up to 2019's Rewind, Replay, Rebound. I'm almost scared to do this intro, Sam, because I did like 6 times on the day that the internet kept cutting out, so I'm almost scared to say this again. But Volbeat are a band that they're this huge multi-platinum selling band, but I'm pretty much barely familiar with them. So if you're a huge Volbeat fan listening to this, I should kind of preface my discussion here by saying that contextually, I've got limited knowledge on Volbeat. Sam, are you in the same boat as me there?
Yeah, I have no idea about anything outside of this album for Volbeat. I've not really been familiar with them at all. I know, like you know of them. And by the way, since the internet crashed, I've just been sat here, frozen in time for 2 days.
Brilliant.
If you're wondering why I'm wearing the same clothes, I initially wanted to be committed to the committed to the edit, so I put on the same hoodie. But if we're gonna just peek behind the green curtain, I actually haven't even showered or anything. So.
That is absolutely amazing. I didn't even think of that. Brilliant. I mean, in terms of Volbeat, their popularity, they're a band that I have often seen people discuss in terms of potentially making that leap in headlining Download, and that's not what this conversation is going to be about, but I think that does speak to the adoration and popularity that Volbeat are accustomed to. I mean, their albums generally perform incredibly well in the charts. They've been in the top 10 of the US Billboard 200 on several occasions, which is a very difficult thing to do. They've also been in the UK top 10, and as you would expect, absolutely monolithically massive in their hometown country of Denmark. In terms of them headlining Download, I listening to this album before we actually talk about our feelings on it, I feel like they've definitely got the kind of crossover appeal that would at least like make them musically a respectable fit for that. Whether they're actually, I don't know what their UK tours sell like, to be honest, but at least musically, the crossover seems like it could fit. Maybe an Alter Bridge and Volbeat co-headliner could be a thing.
Yeah, I could see that from a musical standpoint, because like you say, they fit the moniker of being a sort of all-encompassing type of rock/metal band. There's even moments on this album where you can really see the variety and the different sort of demographics that they can appeal to in quite an impressive manner. And I assume they've got a whole host of songs that also do that in their repertoire that obviously I can't really refer to in detail. This is a great idea of me and you reviewing a band that we have no contextual knowledge for whatsoever, just sort of shuffling around like a blind man. But I understand, actually. I like you, I'm hesitant to crown them as a headliner, because I think to myself, is there enough of a 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 song repertoire that 80,000 people could sort of simultaneously enjoy? Do you know what I mean? So I could see an argument where they're like a sub-headliner or like a co-headliner. Like you say, I think that would be an interesting one. I think pairing them with Alter Bridge as well is kind of putting 250p's together to make a pound. And that kind of feels like what you're trying to do. Or what, the general Download consensus is sort of talking about there. I could see it, I guess. And I can also see how some of their musical career actually sort of lends itself to that. So I'm okay with that viewpoint, to be fair.
So, in a sense, we might be the worst people to review a Volbeat record.
But here's why we're not.
But in a sense, we might not be the worst people to review a Volbeat record because it's weird. It's like a double entendre, because like our lack of contextual knowledge both helps and takes away from our ability to review. So if you're listening to this as a huge Volbeat fan, we're not coming in with any kind of preconceptions. about the band, which helps in a way because we haven't got an idea in the back of our heads of we love it when Volbeat do this, but hate it when they do that. The same way as, I guess, you know, if we were reviewing the new Mastodon album, we had at least good knowledge of Mastodon already. So if Mastodon would have gone completely off kilter and done something completely different, there's a chance they would have had a clamoring or wishing that they wouldn't have. But if this is like an offshoot Volbeat album, me and you wouldn't know. So all we can speak about is the quality of these songs and the quality of this album, which I've got to say, Sam, Volbeat and Michael Poulsen, the vocalist / rhythm guitarist in general, are fantastic at laying down a chorus. This album, at the very, very least, this album is supercharged with some real great choruses, really throughout most of its entirety.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. I think this is a jukebox of a rock and metal album, really. Like it feels like a lot of them have catered to a big hit radio sound, and they appear to have massive success putting that together. And if this is an indication of the sort of music that sort of colours the rest of their discography, then I can completely get it. I really do, because there are so many absolutely massive rock and metal songs, and a few songs that are not really metal or rock songs at all, that also are absolutely humongous. And like, there's like a few bands I was thinking of sort of listening to this, a few of them include sort of like Five Finger Death Punch and maybe like Nickelback at times, but really as well, we were verging on like Megadeth and At the Gates with some of the other moments too. There's like moments where there's like real dark metal and thrash, but also a real rock and pop sensibility that appears to be married very successfully. And I can see why this works for a large audience. I can.
We're going to go into more detail here, but I guess for me, Sam, the greatest marker that would reveal your level of enjoyment of this record is, are you now a Volbeat fan?
I wouldn't say I was a Volbeat fan.
Right, so he doesn't do enough to win you over fully. Because
No.
I feel like I'm a Volbeat fan off the back of this. Did you see that coming?
No.
I love a mate. You know, I love a chorus. I love a chorus.
Yeah, but I thought this would remind you too much of like bands from a yesteryear that you don't really enjoy. Well, yeah, or me and you argue about in smoking areas, as the recent case is evidence for.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I thought that you'd be like, all right, this sounds a bit classic rock for me, and that's a bit of a turn off sometimes for you. But clearly there's enough of a modernity for me. I if someone says Volbeat to me now, I'll have a positive reaction. I'll say I like their last album and I thought it was pretty good. But I'm not necessarily going to dive back in the same way that I have done with previous albums I've heard this year.
Can I ask if for you the sticking points are the kind of slightly cheesy deliveries of some of the climactic moments of the songs? For example, on Temple of, I'm assuming it's Temple of Echo.
Yeah, that was.
I'm assuming Temple of Echo would bother you, and also I would take a guess that Wait a Minute, My Girl would have also bothered you.
Oh, I'm gonna surprise you a little bit.
Okay.
Wait a Minute, My Girl is my favourite song on the album.
Okay, that's really cool, because I've got a note here saying this would be the best song that Green Day have written since 2004.
I was thinking like late 80s Meatloaf.
I'm not familiar with Meatloaf, so I can't really comment on
that. It's the piano, rock, blues, saxophone in the background kind of vibe. You listen to Paradise by the Sea by Meatloaf, or really any like early 80s Springsteen B-side, like has got this kind of like blues rock kind of feel to it, which I immediately found myself gravitating to and thoroughly enjoyed as a palate cleanser in between two fairly standard rock songs. Like Sacred Stones is like a heavy metal tune with a pop chorus. I've heard, thousands of those. And Temple is a 4 to the floor rock tune. In the middle, thoroughly enjoyed it. I completely enjoyed the vocals there, and I actually thought that was one of the songs that really suited his melodic style. Whereas sometimes, what we get back to your initial point, sometimes there's dark music going in the background, and his vocal juxtaposes it in a way that isn't appealing to me. So for me, the highness and the sort of operatic range of his voice actually takes away from some fairly good riff work, where I actually think it should be maybe like gone down the sort of more aggressive or down-tuned route vocally. But that's not his style. That's not the way he sounds. That's the way he feels to his fan base. So I'm not going to sit in it picking what a 6-time platinum selling metal band. Clearly it's working for them. So I've got nothing to say. But just for my personal taste, yeah, there were moments of this that were difficult to swallow, because they just felt a little bit overtly theatrical and dramatic, which as you know, I'm not historically a fan of, really ever. So that's not risky for me necessarily.
I would say though, Sam, that there was a lot of this that I picked up on that I thought, well, at least musically, I know Sam's having a good time here, because
yes,
the build up on The Devil Rages On and the build up on Heaven's Descent are both excellent. And when I was listening to those songs, as well as enjoying them myself, I thought Sam is definitely sitting somewhere and enjoying this, because there's a real musical flair and musical kind of, I guess, kind of like sweeps of ideas really that float through both songs in terms of the instrumental sections. And I just could picture you really getting something from that, because I certainly did. I actually think that The Devil Rages On and Heaven's Descent are both excellent songs. I really enjoy them.
Yeah, I think actually The Devil Rages On is a nice microcosm for what I'm talking about, because I love the opening riff. It felt dirty and bluesy, and I really enjoyed that. I like the swing time falling around it. I even quite enjoyed like his what felt like kind of half an Elvis impersonation with kind of his drawls vocally, and some of the guitar work was reminiscent of Mizzaloo, that sort of like rolling low E note. But the thing what put me off at the end of that song was the valleys references in the vocals that wasn't really necessarily I think it was the bit we was talking about the valley is dark and cold, and he repeats that line over and over again, that type of stuff. That for me, that wasn't working as a crescendo moment for the song. I felt like they had something good going with instrumentation, and just took a turn that wasn't necessarily for me, but the first sort of 4.5 minutes of that was really, really good until that point. But when I talk about the positives, so it doesn't sound like I'm just trashing Volbeat for the sake of it, I thoroughly enjoyed the opening of Say No More, which massively reminded me of She-Wolf by Megadeth, but a little slower. If Megadeth fans are listening to this, hopefully they'll know what I mean. And then it was an interesting rock tune afterwards. I actually enjoyed that they get to the choruses really quickly. They don't mess about. Like Heaven's Descent, like the chorus is like 30 seconds in. Like they're already sort of peaking upwards. I think that's really, really impressive. This is a nice album to chuck on and enjoy. I even enjoyed the ballad, I think it's called Dargan 4.
I love that song. That's my favorite song on the album. That is awesome.
It was really good. Awesome. Really, really good. And it had like a nice depth of the vocals. I really, really enjoyed some massive parts of this. Like there's Step Into Light has an indie riff on it. It feels like. Does. And then Becoming follows it, and that could have been on like a Testament album this year. Like it's kind of wild that they sort of mix all this sort of stuff together. And I think for the most part, it's incredibly successful. I've had like numerous oppositions to various vocalists of various styles over the years, and sometimes things just don't sit right with me as a listener. But bottom line, I think if you like Volbeat's vocal style overall, much more than I do, and I think this works in large portions anyway, then on top of the musicality here, the instrumentation, some of the songwriting, I don't see how you don't walk away from this thinking this is like a 8 or 9 out of 10 album that you've heard this year if you really like Volbeat. I think this is a real success for them. And a comparison, I as well want to talk to you about this. Mind Block. If you put James Hetfield's vocals on this, couldn't this be on the last Metallica album?
I put on for Mind Block, my opening note was that there's a real Megadeth feel to the lead riff, the crunchy sliding riff work. I loved Mind Block. I thought it was really cool.
I agree. I some really nice stuff in as well. Like the the final original song on the album, Lasse's Begita, I think is the name I'm going to try and pronounce it. It's a beautiful riff, really atmospheric, really up-tempo verse, and that reminded me of like old school Merciful Fate, which are like kind of like prog early era new wave, not what no wave British heavy metal, but sort of like a Scandinavian metal band from like the early 80s that Metallica did like 5 covers of for Garage Inc. But they kind of just sounded like this sort of like up-tempo sort of theatrical metal, which I think when done really well is really fun and a really enjoyable listen. And that's what I will say about this. It's not all for me all of the time, but considering it's like 15 things across the album, that is unsurprising. But what it never is boring. It's never dull.
Yeah.
It never lacks interest. There are never 2 songs that really sound the same.
No.
Never 2 song structures that are ever following the same blueprint. Despite the fact the vocalist has a very set range, he sounds how he sounds. They appear to have written a whole variety of songs around his voice that accent it, accentuate it, allow it to be both the forefront and allow it to slip in the background at times for some of the riff work. The guitarist deserves a shout. There are a couple of fantastic guitar solos on here in a variety of styles. I think this is a really, really fun listen, and I can absolutely see why they build a fan base, because you could put, if you're a rock or metal DJ, for radio or a nightclub, you could put this on at 3:00 in the afternoon or 3:00 in the morning, like, and really mix and match. I could hear this on classic rock radio, driving through town or whatever, and also listen to it 2:30, 2 in the morning at a pub or a nightclub. It really does suit that, and I can understand why really they're the archetypal festival band. Because if you're a festival organizer, you could just stick them anywhere, couldn't you? You could just main stage anywhere between 4 p.m. and 11, and you're going to be absolutely fine, and there'll at least be a good time. And I think that speaks to Volbeat's consistency over the years, even though I obviously have not been a partaker in that. You can see it from a distance that they've just been a regular appearer because of stuff like this, where they're simultaneously varied, interesting and consistent, heavy and melodic, with a pop sensibility as well as a relative foot in good metal tropes that don't also wear you out or get repetitive. I get it. I completely understand. This is a professional sounding record from a veteran band. It's a good album.
I think I'm with you. Like at this point, I totally understand why Volbeat are massive, because just to accent something you were saying, beer in your hand at a festival at 7:00 at night with Volbeat playing. Sounds great to me. Sounds great to me off the back of this record. And I'll just shoot out some songs that I would be, obviously I don't know the back catalogue well. So I if I just shoot out some songs off the record that I'd be upset if I didn't hear. What a Minute, My Girl, Shotgun Blues, Devil Rages On, Say No More, Heaven's Descent, Dargan 4, The Passenger, Becoming, Mind Lock. It's most of the album. You know what I mean? It's mostly. Now, obviously, there's very much a chance that there's another 12 or 13 Volbeat songs out there that are much higher quality that people would say, no, you're forgetting this, and this. But from what I've heard from this record, most of this album would be tremendous to experience live with a beer in your hand and your friend, because it's, like you said, when we were talking about the Turnstile record, we said, basically, what do you listen to music for? Music is supposed to be entertaining. It's supposed to be fun. At the very baseline, what you listen to music for is entertainment and fun. And there's absolutely barrages of it on this record everywhere, all over the place. Even in the moments where you could think, oh, they're going a bit over the top here. It's a bit too theatrical for me. It's a bit too cheesy. It's a bit too 80s. It's still fun to listen to because everything's always performed well. I believe, if I'm pronouncing this right, Rob Caggiano is the lead guitarist, and he puts in a performance on this album because some of the solos that he does are absolute bangers. Some real brilliant ones that just coming out of nowhere. I love Dargan 4. Dargan 4 is, it's a shame they've released it as a single, really, because if you're a Volbeat fan, I'd be telling you, oh my God, there's a song on the album called Dargan 4, and you're not ready for how melodic and capturing and how infectious it is. That's
so
my
much better than
Dargan
3.
Brilliant. That's my favourite song on the album. You mentioned Lasse's Begita. I'm not entirely sure. For me, that was the song on the album where I thought, it's nearly 8 minutes, and I was expecting that slow build to hit a climax of something huge. But that never really happens. It's more of a patient repetition of the opening riff. A decent hook from Paulson, the vocalist. But for me, I was waiting for that. After everything this album has done, all these choruses, all these melodic hooks that it's just thrown at you for 40 minutes, you would think that the last 8 was this really climactic, like huge ending, and that never really happens. But there is an army of beautiful melodic hooks throughout this record. Michael Paulson is, yes, his range is somewhat limited, and you mentioned that he doesn't really change his range much, but he still manages to achieve so much with that range. And it's a very, very, very apparent that Volbeat know how to write songs as a band that knocks him up an echelon in terms of his vocal impact. I think that is particularly clear. This album has made a fan out of me of Volbeat. I wouldn't say I am now desperate to check through the back catalogue. I can absolutely tell you I'm interested though. And when the time presents itself, maybe over the Christmas break, and I've got a couple of hours spare, I'll be going to the best of Volbeat section on Spotify, pressing shuffle, and just taking in whatever I can. I think I'll get a bit of a Coheed and Cambria vibe with Volbeat. I'd take Coheed and Cambria over them, but I do get that kind of dexterous, like open-ended rock vibe. Volbeat can be a punk band, they can be a rock band, and they can flirt with metal as well. And they do all of those things very, very well. And
I can see that.
If you're a huge Volbeat fan, I would be amazed and would like to know why, actually, if this album isn't for you, because it is this some kind of sharp left turn they've quickly taken their career. I can't imagine so this long into their career. I can't imagine they're taking huge risks at this point. But thumbs up for Volbeat for me. This album I think is really good. Not quite in my album of the year this or any kind of contention, but such is the ridiculousness of this year, it would have taken something quite spectacular to make me consider that. This is a great record. I really, really enjoyed this. I am glad to have discovered Volbeat now. I have every intention of diving in and seeing the real crux of Volbeat's work.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair enough. This has changed my bias or viewpoint that wasn't based on a great deal of actual factual knowledge about them. They just assumed that they were just a big European band that weren't suited to me, that had an audience that I wouldn't have very much in common with. And listening to that, I can completely understand why they've had some sense of crossover appeal into this country, where they're considered legitimately headlining type act. I think this is a great representation of what they can do, what they have done, and what they're likely to do moving forward. It's a very, very good album. And I think, like you said, if you're a Volbeat fan, I'm unsure what you'd need. But that being said, without the back catalogue, maybe they're a heavier progressive metal band in previous iterations that fans are harking back to. That's fairly common. Or maybe they're just versions of this that they were better at, that you want to say, well, actually, if you like that, you should hear this, this, and this. And that's absolutely fine as well. But at the very least, like I said a little bit earlier, they are a veteran, professional, top tier metal band, relatively speaking. And they have absolutely shown why on this album. So if you're already a fan of these, or even more of a fan than me and you, which is not saying much at this stage, then you're absolutely going to enjoy what's going on ahead, because once again, 2021 has brought it.
I feel like we did as well as we could do there in terms of, I do kind of apologise on behalf of both me and Sam. If you're a huge Volbeat fan listening to a review of the new album, Servant of the Mind, you're going to want to be listening to two guys that have great knowledge on Volbeat. But we wanted to just be open and honest and not try and wing it and try and pretend we had a great knowledge on them when we didn't, because if we did that, we might say something that makes us look even worse than we look right now. So apologies if you were hoping to come to the Volbeat experts and we haven't been that. What we can tell you is, for me, Servant of the Mind is a great record, Volbeat fan or not. There is an undeniable level of brilliant, beautiful melodic hook to this album that just burns throughout 80% of its 55 minute runtime, I can't see any reason why anyone would listen to that record and not find it a good time. So apologies if you're a huge Volbeat fan and we're not massively interlinked into that Volbeat world, but we can't listen to every single band in the history of the world ever. It is difficult. We're actually going to leave it there for this episode of the Noizze Podcast. However, we are going to be back next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, me and Sam are going to release our interview with Aaron Pauley, bassist and vocalist of Mice and Men. That is going to be our final interview of the year, which is going to be a really cool month for me and Sam. Kind of full circle, really, for me and Sam, as interviewing Aaron Pauley. Sam, we were of Mice and Men, the first band we ever saw together at Slam Dunk, 2016 or 15.
Yeah, I think either them or North Lane, if you consider North Lane with the earlier performance and stuff that we saw.
Fascinating.
But of Mice and Men with the headliner on that day.
Kind of a full circle moment for us. That is going to be very, very, very cool. We're releasing that next Tuesday. And then our album of the year show for 2021. Good Lord, how are we going to condense this album list down to 20? Our album of the year show, I am going to release at the latest on the 20th of December. That is going to be the absolute latest I will release the album of the year show. So we are going to go kind of quiet over Christmas. Reason being is that Christmas is generally the quietest period for album releases and general news. Also, me and Sam are pretty busy right now. So we're going to take that period of time to kind of get our stuff done in terms of work, recharge, and then get ready to hit you back up in the new year with fortnightly episodes starting back from January 2022. Thank you so much for listening. We are going to be back then next Tuesday with a pure episode interviewing Aaron Pauley. Remember to follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast, to like or subscribe on YouTube or follow, depending on whichever podcast service you are using. We're going back next Tuesday. Thank you for listening. We love you. Bye.